Okay, good morning. It is a pleasure to have a special episode of what we call Total Wellness at the J. Total Wellness at the J is a monthly podcast where we explore the Tucson J's wellness wheel. We believe as an organization that we are best served when we look at wellness as a broad spectrum or a wheel of activity that is beyond just diet and exercise. And we explore the 15 different elements on our wellness wheel. Today, we're going to be talking about the spoke on the wheel that is known as peoplehood or Jewish peoplehood. It's my pleasure to be sitting here today with Hen Mazzig. The New York Times described him as one of the most nuanced online communicators on Israel and Jewish people. He is globally recognized speaker, educator, author, and digital influencer. With an audience of over 600,000 followers across his social media platforms and content that is reaching over 100 million users, Hen has become a trusted voice on Jewish issues, appearing as an expert in media across 4 different continents, including outlets BBC, CNN, Washington Post, Sky News, the New York Times, and more. Named amongst Al Germiner's top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life in both 2018 and 2021. He is a top 50 influential Jewish LGBTQ voice. Hen recently reviewed Camera's Portrait in Courage. His debut book, best-selling The Wrong Kind of Jew, was released in 2022. This year, the Jewish News recognized him as one of the top 20 young Jewish creatives in the UK and was named amongst the top 25 most influential young Jews by the Jerusalem Post. In 2019, Hen co founded the Tel Aviv Institute, dedicated to researching and combating online anti Semitism. So we have a lot to talk about, and thank you very much for joining me here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. I'm really looking forward to joining you and your community very soon.
Wonderful. So we'd like to start with a bit about your story. Can you share a bit about your family's experience in escaping Iraq and Tunisia?
Yes, absolutely. My mother's family is from Iraq, and my father's family is from Tunisia. My father's family lived in Tunisia for such a long time. They are part of the Amazigh people, which are the first inhabitants of North Africa. And they were just tribal people. And a big section of this, well, fairly big, about 5,000 Jews, were sharing both Jewish identity and Amazigh identity. So they were part of the tribe but also practiced Jewish identity. So they lived in the Atlas Mountains for forever. And there are folklores and stories on how they were fighting against the Islamic expansion of North Africa. And they try to maintain their language and their unique identity. And today, those 5,000 Amazigh Jews are living in Israel. So last names like Mazzig or Amzaleg or Amazigh, which are quite popular in Israel, are descendants of those specific tribal Jewish people from North Africa. My family from Tunisia, they didn't want to live Tunisia really. They wanted to live there, but things became so impossible for them that in 1951, after persecution and oppression, they've just decided to leave. Mind you, that many of the victims of the Holocaust that are not recognized as often are also North African Jews. My family, my grandparents had to work in a forced labor camp of the Nazis that occupied North Africa. And following the Nazis' control over North Africa, and when they left, the Tunisian government continued to implement laws that were really oppressing the Jewish community in North Africa up until 1951 when my family decided to leave to Israel. That was the only country they could go to. And at the same time, my family from my mother's side that lived in Iraq since Iraq was Babylon, they are calling themselves Babylonian Jews. They are the Jews that were expelled from during the Babylonian expulsion of Jews from the land of Judea. They were living in this land for a long time before the Islamic expansion to Iraq, before Iraq was even Iraq. And in 1941, during those 2 days of violent attacks against the Jews of Iraq, my My grandmother saw her best friend being raped and killed in the streets by an Arab officer. She saw a mother and her daughters being killed, and her children, sorry, being killed in the street. My grandmother knew that their time was limited since 1941 after this pogrom. And in 1950, they decided to leave. The decision wasn't, again, just like my family from my father's side, it wasn't really a decision. It was um, flee or be killed. There were restriction laws on those communities, on the specific Jewish community. Just like any Jew in the Middle East and Arab countries, they were considered to be dhimmis. A dhimmi is a protected minority, someone that is being protected as long as they're paying a fee, a tax to be protected. So living as a second-class citizen, they weren't allowed to wear the same clothes as Muslims. They weren't allowed to walk in the same sidewalks. They weren't allowed to build buildings that were taller than a Muslim building in the neighborhood. So their life were really difficult. And in 1950, they packed their bags and left, wanting to leave with those bags. But even in the airport, when they were about to go on the flight to Greece and from Greece to Israel, the Arab officers took their bags away. So they literally came to Israel with nothing but the clothes to their bags. And they arrived to Israel and they were happy. They were happy to be back in Zion. My grandmother always says that when she was in Iraq, in Baghdad, they saw this quote on how on the rivers of Babylon we were weeping, hoping to go back to Zion. This famous quote from Psalms, that this was their identity. They felt connected to Israel. They wanted to go back, not in this way, but because they have arrived in Israel, for them it was for the first time they felt like equal citizens.
It's an incredible story and an incredible journey, and I'm so happy that they were able to make it and to actually return to Zion and be there in Eretz Israel. You wrote a book in 2022 titled "The Wrong Kind of Jew: A Mizrahi Manifesto." Tell me a little bit about why you wrote the book and what you were hoping for the readers to be able to get out of it. And, I'll share that I had the honor of being in Israel last January and spent time with Rabbi Peretz. So like I'm curious to learn more and to understand really the story in a much deeper way.
That's so important. I mean, the reason that I wrote this book is because when you ask many of my Mizrahi family members about the Holocaust, they know all the stories. Me, myself, I know every name of every death camp, and I remember it, and we should remember it. It's such an important part of our Jewish history. But I often feel like it's lacking the stories of the Middle Eastern Jewish communities. I feel like we are not as educated. When I ask my Ashkenazi friends in Israel about the Farhud, the 2 days of violent attacks against the Jews of Iraq, they don't know what it means. They don't know what the story is. And that was very glaring for me to realize that while I'm so educated on one part of Jewish history, there's a whole part of Jewish history that is untold. So for me, it was important to tell my story and to tell my family story. Out of a family of, my mom has 11 brothers and sisters, and my dad has 16. Out of all of them and their children and my uncles and aunts and cousins, I'm the only one that actually writes in English and speaks about these issues in English. So I feel like I have responsibility to share the stories of my family. And the other part was that after my military service, I moved to America. I lived in Seattle for a few years, and I've seen that there was this trend, the anti-Israel trend that a lot of us are seeing today, started back then. That was in 2012, and I saw that all of it is really based on the foundation that somehow Jews are white, and somehow we are all white colonizers that came to the Middle East and took land that is not ours. There's this attempt to disconnect Jews from Jerusalem and Jews from Israel, which for me is laughable, but it's happening, and a lot of students on encampments throughout America have bought into this idea that Jews are just European colonizers. We have nothing to do with this land. And what I'm trying to achieve with the story of Mizrahi Jews is not to say that any Jew has more relationship to the land or more connection to the land. It doesn't matter if you live in Europe or in the Amazons or in America or in India or in Iraq, like my family. All Jews are connected to the land of Israel. And that's what I'm exploring in my book. I'm trying to reach the conclusion with my reader that Jews are indigenous people, that this indigenous connection that we have to the land of Israel is one that is not severed by demographic or distance from the land of Israel. It doesn't matter if you were 2 hours drive away from Israel or if you were a flight of 10 hours, you still maintain this connection to this land. And this missing part of the puzzle, the story of those 850,000 Jews, almost a million Jews that were expelled from the Middle East and North Africa as refugees by the Arab countries and Muslim countries, is one that is not being told. And it's not told because I think it's intentionally erased by powers that are anti-Israel, that don't think Israel has the right to exist. And if they recognize that there were 850,000 refugees that came to Israel that today make up over 50% of Israeli Jews, that means that Israel is actually a country that, by American definition of whiteness and people of color, it's a country of people of color. It's a country of Jews of color. And the biggest community of Mizrahi Jews in the world lives in Israel. The only place where Iraqi Jewish cuisine or Tunisian Jewish cuisine or the Iraqi Judeo-Arabic is spoken and maintained is in Israel. This is where this community is living. So Israel is so far from being what they branded as a European colony. It's a Middle Eastern country with Middle Eastern people, whether they lived in Europe for a few hundred of years or they lived in the Middle East and stayed in the Middle East for centuries. We all have this connection, and this is what Israel is for me. And that's what I'm trying to achieve by writing the stories and analyzing this conflicts that we're seeing around the world.
I think that's right, and I think the residual benefit is that um, we are one people connected with one story, and even though we were dispersed to many other places, we have a responsibility to know each other's story, even within the Jewish community, and I think that a deeper understanding of Mizrahi heritage amongst the Jewish community that it may be from Eastern Europe will be beneficial to the Jewish future. So you're accomplishing a number of things with one single writing. So I thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think it's a book that is meant both for Jews and non-Jews, but there's a lot of it is for the Jewish community that has not engaged with Mizrahi stories and Mizrahi heritage. And I agree with you completely. I think it's important for us to know each other's stories and seeing the differences and celebrate unity through diversity.
I agree. I just want to take a minute and check in on you, how you're doing since October 7th, and where you find the strength and motivation to be out there day in and day out on social media with very honest and very authentic posts that are helpful, but I'm sure not all the comments that you receive back are equally helpful. So I thank you for that, but I also would love to hear from you just how you're doing with it all and where you find that motivation.
It's hard. It's hard to put yourself out there every day. Since October 7th, I feel like I know it might sound cliche, but I felt like my entire life has led me to this moment of helping the Jewish community navigate October 7th and just going on social media and creating the posts that I'm creating, the tweets, the content, the videos. It became more than just work for me. It's not just something that I do that I
Mhm.
log off at 9 p.m. and go to sleep or whenever it is I work, 15 hours a day. I feel like it's been just a long day.
Yeah.
And whenever I feel like I'm tired, I just remind myself it's much more tiring for the families of the hostages, the people in Israel, my family living in Israel. It's hard for everyone, and I just try to encourage myself to do as much as I can, not to burn myself out, but to just to do what I can to support my community. On October 8th, I called my commanders in the army in my reservist unit asking if they need my help. And they said, we're seeing what you're doing on social media, just continue doing it because we need that more than anything. So I stayed and I do it. So for me, it's almost like I feel like I'm, one of the field commanders on social media, trying to tell our story better. And it's important for me because I also see voices from within the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community, that are using very radical or very extremist voices, sorry, messaging that I think is not contributing for peace. Everything I do, every post I put out there is meant to help people understand the truth, understand their the news that we're talking about, make better sense of the situation, but also bring us closer to peace. Also supporting both Israelis and Palestinians and Lebanese and Yemenites and Syrians, anyone that is affected by war. I don't want war. Israel doesn't want war. We didn't set out to achieve anything on October 7th. It wasn't Israel that started this brutal attack and took innocents hostages. It was Hamas. Hamas wanted Israel to get into this war. So for me, it's just really important to do this because I feel like it helps. And every time I go in the street and someone stops me, which happens very often now, people would come up to me and say thank you, or so many times, yeah, it happens very often that people would just cry or give me a big hug, and it means the world to me because I feel like it's not me, Hen Mazzig, it's what I represent to them, and I represent to them strength, and I represent to them confidence, and I represent to them keeping your humanity while speaking up for our community. That's what I'm setting to achieve, to help Jews feel more confident that they are on the right side of history. I feel like we're often almost forgetting, because of all the misinformation and all the propaganda that is spread online, that we are the side that did not start this war. We are the side that lived in peace, and we want peace again. We want a ceasefire, contrary to what those protesters are saying on the other side. We are the ones that are interested in a ceasefire, but not before we get our hostages, not before we get our uh, peace and we are able to live in our home without rockets. That's not too much to ask. And I think we just need think everyone needs a reminder. I need this reminder every once in a while. I have to remind myself. So yeah, it's important.
Well, I think in this season of Hanukkah, you really are a light unto all of us, and appreciate your posts. And it is a very special miluim that you are doing, and I appreciate your commander saying that to you.
Thank you so much.
I'm curious about the Tel Aviv Institute. Tell me a little bit about how that got started, because it's 5 years now.
Yeah, well, when we first started, we was just the Tel Aviv Institute is a 501(c)(3, an American nonprofit that we started. Myself and Dr. Ron Katz he was a teacher on rhetoric and propaganda at UC Berkeley, and we started it because we wanted to analyze anti-Semitism on social media. That was 5 years ago, and as time passed, we've realized that this big secret that probably the viewers and listeners would be shocked to find out. A lot of people hate Jews online. Shocking, I know.
I
Um,
didn't know that. I'm going to write that down.
so we wanted to come up with a way to fight it, not just to analyze it. And I think it was in May 2021 when we had our first laboratory for influencers. It was a lab where we brought 20 influencers from different backgrounds, a chef, an actor, people that have big platforms in social media and are doing anything in the creative industry. And we just gave them the tools to speak about anti-Semitism and speak about their Jewish identity and about Israel. And during that time, in May 2021, there was this cycle of violence, and Hamas started launching rockets, and Israel retaliated. And a lot of people found it very difficult to find the right words to describe the situation and to stand up for Israel when the other side is saying those horrific things about us. And by the way, since May 2021, they were calling it a genocide. Actually, far before that, they were calling every time Israel was defending itself an attempt at genocide of Palestinians. Of course, it's not an attempt of genocide. We know that there are 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. The population there continues to grow. It doesn't take away from the pain and the hardship and the fact that innocents do die in war, and Palestinians were killed in this war, and that's heartbreaking and not just worthy. It should be condemned, and Israel has condemned it. But it's not definitely not an attempt to eradicate Palestinian population. And I think, sorry, I went a bit off, but
That's okay.
the idea was really to create this group of influencers that will be able to advocate to one of the things that our board always said is that what I'm doing is great, but we need 10 more people like me. So the goal was to create that, to create more voices that will be able to do it. And we had through our training people like Eli Calabone and Danielle Ryan Spalding, and we had Jewish voices that are able to engage in such a meaningful way, like Zoe Buckman. She's an artist from New York that is doing amazing work on social media. We had incredible roster. Emmanuel Cherkis, she's an actor. She was in our recent lab. So really all about giving those voices support and confidence to speak up. And then we stay in touch with them, and we have a team of graphic designers, video editors, content writers that are all under my leadership, are able to support those influencers when they want to speak up. We find that talking points are not really helpful for Jews in Israel, because talking points are they just sound the same, and they haven't worked. I mean, and if they did, maybe Israel would have a better PR than it does now. So the goal is to help them find their own voice and give them the confidence to use their platforms the way they do, to educate their followers. So if it's if it's a vegan chef that we work with, the chef worked with us on this program where he called it Oi Vegan, and it was all about creating vegan Jewish food. So that was a way for him to use his voice and his platform in a way to educate people about his Jewish identity. So yeah, that's what we do on at Tel Aviv Institute.
Amazing. I would encourage people to look it up and become more familiar with that, and to also go back to an earlier question, uh, check out Chen's book. I think you will find it very, very inspiring. So localizing it to what we do here at the JCC Association has a statement of principles, and we say Israel is the eternal birthright of the Jewish people, linking us to our past and to Jews around the world today. So, working in the space of JCCs, which are Zionist organizations, we have a responsibility to help our community make Zionism a part of our individual and collective Jewish identity. In a post October 7th world, this work is more important than ever and at times more difficult than ever. How would you go about working towards that goal of embedding Zionism in our collective Jewish identity?
I think that we need to redefine Zionism for ourselves and for the world. I feel like the term itself has become so diluted by people misusing it and reframing it and giving it different definition. And I think it's just important for everyone to be on the same page that when we say the word Zionist and Zionism, we mean that it's the belief that Jews have the right to live in the land of Israel. It doesn't say anything else about anyone else. It doesn't mean that no one else should live in this land. Of course not. Israel is a pluralistic democracy that is very diverse. It doesn't mean that one specific type of Jews can live there, or that Israel should live under some set of rules. It doesn't mean any of it. All of this can be interpreted later on. But to be a Zionist is to believe that Jews have the right to live in our ancestral homeland. I think that the other important part is that we need to remind people that majority of Jews around the world are Zionists. To every study from Pew Research and Gallup and Malman groups, vast majority of American Jews are Zionists, over 90%, meaning having a positive sentiment towards the land of Israel, believing that Jews have the right to live in the land of Israel. If you add to this the fact that 7 million Jews live in Israel, over 95% of Jews worldwide support the right of Israel to exist. They are Zionist. Doesn't mean that there's no anti-Zionist voices. Of course, there are anti-Zionist Jewish voices within our community, but they do not represent our community. They represent a fringe minority that I don't think should be silenced. I think they should be able to say what they want to say, but it's not our community. I see it as a gay person within the LGBTQ community. There's gay voices that oppose same-sex marriage or oppose gay couples being able to adopt. Famously, Dolce and Gabbana, the gay couples designers, were saying that they oppose same-sex couples adopting kids. That doesn't mean that they are not gay, just means that it doesn't represent the voices and the majority of the LGBTQ community, the gay community. The same way that when Kanye West famously said in just a few years ago that slavery was a choice, no one serious would take that and say, okay, this is what the Black community think. We know that this is a fringe point of view. Or Candace Owens saying things about how she doesn't think George Floyd should be remembered, and she had said horrible things about him. No one in the Black community think that this is the majority view of the Black community. I think in the same way, anti-Zionist Jews are such a fringe voice, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be speaking. They should say whatever they want to say. But I think the world needs to recognize that the vast majority of Jews around the world are Zionists. Being Zionist means to believe the land of Israel and the connection of the Jewish people to this land and their right to live there. But I think once we are able to define these two things, what is Zionism, and that the vast majority of Jews are Zionists, then we'll have a better and easier way to continue the conversation on. But we have to set a table before we are able to have dinner.
I think that's 100% right. And I think where today I see some people struggle with that, and while I don't agree with that struggle, is can you be a Zionist and then criticize the Israeli government, or do I have to shed my Zionist identity to say something? And my view is that you can be a Zionist, and part of being Jewish is that dialogue and disagreement. But share some thoughts on your end.
I think that you can absolutely criticize the Israeli government and still be a Zionist, just as the millions of Israelis that go out to the street every weekend to protest Netanyahu and his government. I'm sure that even within Netanyahu's government, they have criticism to the Israeli government. It's funny because I've never heard any Jewish voice in the Jewish community, at least not legitimate voice, saying that you can't criticize Israel. I never heard anyone from Israel or really any thought leader or voice, legitimate voice, saying something like this. The only people that are saying it are people that are on the other side that want to say horrible things about Israel and want to say that Israel has no right to exist. To be clear, anti-Zionism is not criticism of Israel. Anti-Zionism is the belief that Israel should be demolished and that no Jewish state in any capacity should ever exist. And that's not criticism of Israel. If you want to criticize the Israeli policy, Israeli government, if you want to criticize specific policies, you're more than welcome to do it. Israel should be criticized. It's a country like any other country. If you have criticism to America, to the government, no one's going to say that you're anti-American. But you can criticize the country without saying that the only solution is that this all people would be wiped off the land, even if you disagree with Prime Minister Netanyahu or whoever is president in America. If you have disagreement with the president in America, you can voice this criticism. I think that's just important to remind people. And the other thing is that I welcome valid criticism of Israeli government and its policies. It's something that I do. It's something that many Israelis do. But when activists and political leaders have endless energy to hunt Israel, but no words for Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis that have starved tens of thousands of children in Yemen, or for Assad for what he's done, it reveals a sinister double standard to calling out the values they claim to hold dear. And that's really, I think, important issue to bring up. How are you so energetic when it comes to criticizing Israel, but then you can't say a word to criticize the Assad regime? And just to give you a few examples, AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilan Omar are three congresswomen that have been very outspoken about the war in Gaza. I found no words to condemn Assad, the Assad regime that has in the last few days have been removed from Syria. But I think that's just really reveals the sinister and just the motives of many of those voices. It's really not about protecting Palestinians. I don't think they are doing it for the love of Palestinians, but rather for the hate to Israel.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So as we think about Zionism as one of the cornerstones of our Jewish identity, what we had talked about earlier, um, sometimes people within the Jewish community feel like they lean into the Jewish value of tikkun olam. How do we help make Zionism an equal Jewish value where everyone believes that we lean into the belief that we have a right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland, and hold that as dear or as a part of tikkun olam?
For me, the value of Tikkun Olam is really about making the world a better place um, for everyone, but of course specifically for our community. So I think that when when we speak about Israel from a place of kindness and love, and we wanted to improve, that's totally legitimate. I think it's something that we need to discuss. But very often, the people that are so outspoken and have so much energy to criticizing Israel and its policies are not coming from that place. So I think it's important to distinguish legitimate criticism, or criticism that is meant to build up, and criticism that is meant to destroy. And this criticism that is meant to destroy is often the criticism that is coming from a place of hatred and a place of anger, and is not about tikkun olam. So for me, tikkun olam, and I think for what it means from the scholars and the rabbis that I've followed and read from and learned from, and specifically Rabbi Sachs, that was talking a lot about this notion of how Jews are this light on the world, but this light that is about improvement and becoming better, and not to bring down. That's the important thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So here in Tucson, we have something we call the Weintraub Israel Center, which is a partnership between the Tucson JCC and Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona, or the Jewish Federation. And we frame our work through the values of the Z3 project, which was created out of the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto. And there are three guiding principles: unity, not uniformity; engage as equal partners; and welcoming a diversity of voices. Within the Jewish community, how can we authentically achieve the idea that we can be unified without being uniform, and welcome voices we don't agree with? And then how do we draw the boundaries, if necessary, as to what those other voices may or may not be saying? So where does that whole thing come together?
Well, I love this idea, and I love the how we need to make sure we hold those elements. And I've actually followed the Z3 conference. It seems like an amazing initiative. I wish they would invite me once to speak there.
Well, I'll try to see to that for next year. I would love to have you there with us. I go
Yeah,
every year.
I would love to. But yeah, I think that's the important part, right? When we put set up values, and we set up those sort of ideas that should lead our work and inform our work. We really need to make sure that we are doing it in a way that is representative of as many parts of our community. And I think the Z3 have done fantastic work when they invited, I've seen they had Arab Israelis, they had Jews from different backgrounds speaking, Israelis from different political views. And I think that's the type of conversations that we need to have. We need to have diverse opinions and diverse points of view, because that is really the way to have a successful company. I've seen a study that showed that a company, a business would succeed much more if it has diversity in the leadership. And I think that's what us as Jews have. We have diversity of opinions. We allow different points of view. We allow disarguments. Just read the Talmud, and you'll see how there's so many different perspectives. And we're not afraid to argue, and we're not going to hate each other for having different opinions. We're coming from a place of love. So I think that when you have those values leading you, and you have engagement with people, even if you disagree with them, you are able to make the difference. So for me, it's really not more much about the boundaries, rather than about the love and the kindness, and coming from a place of kindness. That's what leads me in the work that I'm doing. That's how I'm able to speak about complex and nuanced issues like the war in Gaza, and not let my moral compass ever be tainted or change. And yeah, just coming from a place of love and kindness, I think is the way to achieve the biggest impact, and without losing who you are.
Great. And you know, anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred, and yet it feels like there is a new modern definition that's been created. What are the identifiers, in your view, of modern anti-Semitism, and how would you define modern anti-Semitism?
Right. And if I had $1 for every time this question was asked, it's it's really the question that we're all trying to understand or unpack. And I think it's because anti-Semitism is not a coherent set of beliefs. It's a set of contradictions, right? Before the Holocaust, Jews were hated because We were poor and because we were rich. We were hated for being communist and for being capitalist. We were hated for being ourselves and because we infiltrated everywhere, because we clung to old traditions and set of beliefs, and religious ancient beliefs, but also we were ruthless cosmopolitans that invaded everywhere and believed in nothing, right? And it's that's the way that anti-Semitism it's survived. It survived because it mutated, and the hatred of Jews has never looked the same in every generation. When you look at it, it just looked completely different. The root of it is, of course, this hatred of Jews, and it comes from scapegoating. It comes from misinformation and lies that are plus trigger are turning into this scapegoating. But also the legitimization of anti-Semitism, of why people hate Jews, also changed throughout history. When people have sought to justify anti-Semitism, they've done so by reaching the highest source of authority that was available within the culture. So in the Middle Ages, it was the religion. In post-Enlightenment Europe, it was about science. And today, it's about human rights. And that's why Israel alone, out of all the nations of the world, is being treated the way that it does for fighting a war that it didn't start, to release hostages that were taken from us and are still held. And it's regularly accused by what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs described as the 5 crimes against human rights, which is racism, apartheid, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. That has been true since Rabbi Sachs was speaking about it when he was alive, but it's also true today. And this is the blood libel of our time. To accuse Israel of committing those crimes is to say that Jews are responsible for them. And if you want to really identify anti-Semitism, just find this way of uh, um, finding the scapegoat, of accusing someone else for the problems of society, and that is what happening to Jews continuously. And instead of looking into societies and find out why they have the issues that they are having, they're just pointing a finger at someone. And anti-Semitism is has always been the easiest form uh, of hatred to justify why the situation in society are as they are. It's, of course, it's a cognitive failure, because it reduces a complex problem into simplicities. It divides the world into black and white and seeing everything as the fault of one side. And that's what we're experiencing today. And I think it's the way to fight it is for societies to not only fight it for Jews, but also fight it for themselves, because it's a sign of a weak society, of a sick society, that if it's not being eradicated, it's going to really affect everyone in this society. Um, yeah.
Fantastic. I think you nailed it, and I hope people will listen to that definition and that explanation on repeat. Earlier, we spoke about the Weintraub Israel Center and the goal of the J to make Zionism a part of our collective Jewish identity. We've created a generative mission statement to help each individual find their own personal connection. So I'm going to share my screen, and you and I can take a moment and uh, interact with this statement, and hopefully come up with our own words. So we created this mission statement with 2 word clouds, but obviously there are more words that you can fit in for your own self-propelled journey to nurture your relationship with Israel and Israelis. So, Hannah, I'll give you a moment, but I would love to hear how you would fill in the Mad Lib.
So self-propelled journey of individuals to create and nurture I think probably thoughtful would be the word that I would take, or loving. Do I have to choose just one?
You know what? I've done this so many times, and depending on the moment, I change words. So,
Maybe even loving relationship with Israel and Israelis. I think that's the basis of all of it, and it's much stronger than any other facts and thoughts that we can speak about. Love is really the important thing. So I would say loving relationship with Israel and Israelis, enabled by opportunities offered by the local Jewish community, as well as other sources that will inspire them to. Inspire them to change.
Ah,
I would say change. I
I
think
like
change
that.
is good. It's important, and it's something that we change all the time, right?
Yeah. So,
What are the words that you would choose, Todd?
so today for me, I would say a self-propelled journey of individuals to create and nurture a meaningful relationship with Israel and Israelis, enabled by opportunities offered by the local Jewish community as well as other sources that will inspire them to engage.
Mm, amazing.
And this changes day by day, but I think as a tool, it allows people to find their own path and their own words and to really lean in as possible, and when necessary, hug and wrestle um, with it, but always believing in that wrestling that it should exist. It's ours. It will be ours for time immemorial. And because of that, we are entitled to wrestle a bit. As we're wrapping up today, can you share a message of hope and resilience with us?
Sure. I'm thinking we spoke about October 7th and we spoke about how challenging this time is for many Jews, not just me. I mean, we're all um dealing with it in a different way. Um I keep thinking of how hard it is for me and for a lot of us, and I have to draw strength from our ancestors, and we're about to celebrate Hanukkah, and I'm reminded of the Maccabees and how they fought against a ruthless enemy, against an empire that wanted to eradicate all of them. And I'm reminded of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto that have uprised against a horrible enemy that committed a genocide, and they fought back. And I'm thinking about the Jews in the state of Israel that when the state of Israel was established, I'm thinking about how they were fighting, just a few years after the Holocaust, fighting to build their homeland. And I'm thinking that all of this is just meant to empower us. That's why Jews are telling stories and reading history, and our Bible is so important, and those stories are so meaningful to us because they are part of our identity, and that's how we can make sense of our reality. That's how we can make sense of the fight that we have to fight. But this is also how we make sense of our existence, and where we are right now. Although we don't see it often, we are at the moment that we are going to inspire generations to come that are going to look back at us and say, "What did my ancestors did when this happened to them?" So I want us to look at the heroes of the past, but also remember that we are the heroes of today, and each one of us, in our own way, we are able to make a difference. We are able to stand up, and everything we do right now will inspire generations to come.
And that's a wonderful message to end on. I want to thank Hen Mazzig for joining me today on this special edition of Total Wellness in the J. I'm Yisrael Chai. I look forward to seeing you this weekend.
I'm Sahai. Thank you so much, Todd.
At the Tucson J, everyone belongs and some people join. For more information about our work, go to tucsonjcc.org.